While you're turning there, I just want to kind of let you know the direction we're moving. All week, we have preached passionately that God is worthy of everything you have. We've preached that in spite of circumstances, in spite of suffering, in spite of the world, in spite of anything at all, God is worthy. Even to the point of dying, glorifying Him in the same way that Michael did. That He's so glorious that He's worth every second I have on earth, and if it takes me dying for Him, so be it. That He's so glorious that He is worth my everything. And I can say this all day long, and I can preach it all day long. But the question that you will have to answer, that will decide your eternity, is, was He worthy for you? He's not going to ask you, when you die and stand before God, the question won't be, was I worthy for your youth pastor, or your mom, or your dad, or your friend? It's not going to be, did you sing in church and get goosebumps? The question will be, who was the Lord of your life? And if that answer is anything other than Jesus, you're going to hell. And I know for a fact that there's lost souls. Some of you are lost. You may not even know it, but you don't know God. You don't know Jesus. Your faith isn't in Him. And if we were in a tragic accident tonight or tomorrow on the bus ride home and you lost your life, you would be sent to eternal hell. And so the question I want you to answer and have in your head tonight is He truly worth it for me? Is Jesus worthy? Look at Luke 14, verse 25. Luke 14, verse 25. Says this. Now great crowds accompanied Him. You've seen this text before. You're familiar with this text. This text is saying that great crowds accompanied Jesus. This is what this means. Jesus had done so many supernatural things and divine things. He had walked on water. He had healed the sick. He had made the blind to see and the deaf to hear. He had done all of these incredible acts, and He preached with a power and an authority no one had ever done before. He was unlike any other human being in the history of human beings. That somehow, some way, we know of this Jesus guy, even though He's from a city of nobodies. From a place that isn't even remotely close to America. Why? Because He was a person of all persons. He was a man of all men. He stood out. He wasn't just an elite or a higher level person. He stood out in a class of His own. And because of that, a lot of people were following Him. It says this, and He turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, he what? He cannot be my disciple. You gotta feel the weight of that. You have to feel the weight of that. Jesus literally just said, if you don't do this, you cannot follow me. You see, a lot of times we come to Jesus with an agenda. We come to Jesus wanting eternal life, wanting the things He offers, wanting to be saved, wanting to have that peace, that security, and that hope, but we don't want to follow Him. What Jesus wants is for you not just to come. It says, I want you to come and come to me and hate your own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life. Here's what this means. The word hate is a word for a lesser love. So what Jesus is saying is that before anything in your life, It doesn't matter what society says or society does. It doesn't matter society says family over everything. No, before your mom and dad, before your grandmother and grandfather, before your brothers and sisters, before anything at all is Jesus. That he's not a God that is on the shelf, that we go to school, go to sports, go do our things, and then we have time for him. No, he's an everyday number one priority before school, before sports, before family, before everything is Jesus. That is discipleship. That is maturity. And that is evidence of salvation. That what your life revolves around is not what everyone else's does, but it revolves around the Son of God. The next verse, verse 27. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. You see, there's a challenge in this because if you misunderstand what bearing your cross is, you'll misunderstand the whole point. And don't forget, everyone look at me, do not forget this. He says, if you don't do this, you cannot be my disciple. That this is a necessity. That if you're truly saved, this box is checked. That you bear your cross. So what does it look like to bear a cross? What does it mean to bear our cross? Why do we have to bear our cross? Go to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26. Matthew 26. Remember, you must bear your own cross. Matthew 26. Now, as we read this, here's what's going to be important. If you read this with the wrong eyes or mindset, you're going to miss the point. If you read this, what we're about to read, and your heart isn't open, you're missing the point. If you read this and you're already saved and this doesn't break your heart, you're missing the point. Like what we're about to read is the details of the crucifixion. And I'm going to say it again. I was so disgusted with myself. Because in high school, I would hear the preacher start talking about the cross, and I'd be like, I already know that. This isn't for me. I know all about the cross. I'm already saved. The cross is everything. Romans 5:9 or 5:8 says, but God shows his own love to us in this, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So here's what this means. If you want to see the love of God, and if for anyone in here right now, if you're lost or on the fence or you're searching and you don't know and you're not sure, here's going to be your question. Does God love me? He says, I love you, and the way I show that is through the crucifixion of my Son for your sin. So that every single sin, every lie you told, every lie I told, every time you sinned, every time, past, present, future, every single one of them hung him to the cross. So when we read this, all the details, remember that we are responsible for what Jesus went through. Remember that the only reason he had to go through it was for us, and he did it out of his love for us. So God says, I love you by the very thing we're about to study. Verse 36 is the beginning of the bearing your cross section. Matthew 26, verse 36. It says this, then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Now here's the context. Everybody look up real quick. Here's the context. Jesus is mere moments away from the crucifixion. He has lived a life characterized by his perfection. He has lived a life in which 12 men have followed him and were his disciples. He has committed no crime. He has done no wrong. He has committed no sin. But by the utter threat of what he presents, and by him bringing and coming onto the scene with such divine authority, they plotted to kill him, which had to happen for you and me. And so here's where we're at. moments away from the crucifixion. Keep in mind that Jesus always talked about how he was going to go to the cross, how his destiny was to go to the cross, how he's the Son of God, but he's here on earth to go hang on the cross for the sins of the world. And then look at verse number 39. This should break your heart. We're reading about the Son of God. It says, "In going a little farther, he," being Jesus, "fell on his face." I mean, that right there, before we keep going, that right there. Do you realize who this is? Aaron was preaching this earlier. He deserved the most royal entrance. He deserved the most glorious entrance. He deserved everything, to be praised and worshiped. We should be falling flat on our face at the sight of him. And here he is, falling flat on his face because he's in complete agony. He is emotionally wrecked because he knows of what is coming in the cross. So, let's continue reading in verse 39. "And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, 'My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me.'" And if you've heard me preach this before, you know why this is so shocking. Like, this is a complete shock from Jesus. The very guy who was talking about his destiny was to die on a cross is now standing here begging God, actually falling flat on his face, begging God, "Please don't send me to that cross." He doesn't want to go. There's something within him that knows it's going to be absolute suffering. There's something in him that knows that what lies before him is something that is almost, it's impossible to even think about. And he is in such agony thinking about what he's about to go through that he begs God, "Please don't send me to the cross. I don't want to go." The very guy who said, "That's my destiny. That's where I'm going. I have to. And here we are, moments away. "God, don't do it to me." And can you imagine this? Think about this. God hears his sinless son, innocent son, cry out to him, "Please, Father, don't send me to the cross." You see, God had a choice. It was either save his son or choose to send him to the cross so that he could know you. And God turned his face and sent Jesus to the cross. That's just a slight fraction of the love of God. That as his innocent son cries out to him, he still sends him to the cross because he wants you. He wants your devotion. He wants your time. He doesn't want you to ignore him. He doesn't want you to neglect him. He wants you so bad that his son is crying out to him, "Don't make me do it." And he sends him there. Is there ever such a love as that? Continue reading with me. Verse number 42 says this, "Again for the second time, he," being Jesus, "went away and prayed, 'My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done.'" Here's what this means. If the only way they can be saved, if the only way for the salvation of their soul is me hanging on a cross, so be it. But notice what he's obedient to. Look down at verse 42. "Again for the second time he went away and prayed, 'My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your" what? "Your will be done." You see, here's why obedience is so important. Here's why this is so crucial. Because Jesus was obedient to the will of the Father to the point of death. That he, with everything in him, did not want the will of the Father to happen. That he, with everything in him, did not want to obey the will of God. That he, with everything in him, would have ran away the opposite direction if he could have. But the will of God was for you. And he obeyed the will of God to the point of being hung to a cross. So we live our life for Jesus. That's part of the reason we bear our cross. Because in spite of the world, in spite of what everybody else is doing, in spite of the culture, in spite of all the things that people tell you is the new norm, we don't waver on the fact that we are followers of Jesus Christ and that our allegiance lies with Jesus and that we are first and foremost bearers of that cross. We do the will of the Father regardless of if it causes us pain, suffering, or conflict. We obey God. That's the Christian life. And that's what's missing from our lives in American Christianity as a whole. We are so disobedient to the will of the Father. Continue reading in Matthew 20. Go to Matthew 27. Flip over. Matthew 27. Go to verse 15. Is everyone there? You there? All right. Verse 15 says, "Now at the feast the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one," what? Prisoner whom they wanted. Verse 16, "And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas." Now here's what this is saying here. There's a choice from the crowd of people, and what they're choosing is Barabbas, this notorious prisoner who's a murderer and a rebel and has tried to lead an insurrection. He's a terrible person. He has broken law after law after law. He's taken human lives. He deserves the cross. He deserves the pain. He deserves the humility. He deserves the suffering. He deserves the execution. That does it. And then you have on the right, Jesus, the innocent Son of God. And standing before Jesus and Barabbas is a crowd of people who get to choose which one's crucified and which one gets to go free. Again, their choices. The Son of God, innocence. Or this murdering guy who led an insurrection, who was a proven criminal. Go to verse 21. "The governor again said to them, 'Which of the two do you want me to release for you?' And they said," what? Barabbas. I want you to think about this. If you've ever felt left out, if you've ever felt like you're overlooked, if you've ever felt like you're betrayed, if you've ever felt any of those things, I want you to remember Jesus was fully man, fully God. He felt emotion. And he's standing before a crowd of people who he's about to go and die for their sin. And I wonder how much it broke his heart when instead of choosing to release him, they chose to release the murdering rebel thug who deserved the cross. You see, it's in every way, it's such a scandalous scene. In every way, we deserve the cross. Barabbas deserved the cross. We deserve to hang there. We're the sinners. We're guilty. We deserve it. He took it. He took your place. You've got to see that. That the picture of Barabbas and Jesus and the crowd releasing him, even though he deserves every bit of the cross, he murdered and stole and was a rebel and a criminal. He deserved it. Jesus took it. That's a picture of you. That you have sinned, that you are guilty, that you have sinned against God time after time after time, that you're guilty of all of these sins against God, and for every one of them, Jesus nailed them to the cross. Because of God's love for you. He loves you with the love that drives so deep that it drove nails into his son's hands. I mean, it's a groundbreaking, incredible, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching love. If you can't feel the weight of this, you have to. You have to let this happened. This is real. This is historical. This is my Savior. This is my life. This stuff actually happened. They killed the Son of God. They chose the murdering criminal to release him over the innocent Jesus. Why? Because God loves you. He loves you so much. And it's not that he asks too much of you. It's that he just wants you. He loves you with a love that is unbreakable, unshakable, and immeasurable. There's not a love on planet Earth or in the existence of anything that compares to the love of God. He loves you. Go to verse 22. He's still standing before the crowd, and here's what it says. Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called the Christ?" Surely the crowd's going to let him go. He's done no wrong. Continue. They all said, "Let him be crucified." Verse 23. And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." Do you understand the depth of this? Do you understand that this had to happen for you, for me? If there were, this is everything. Like at the cross, the love of God, the mercy of God, the justice of God, the wrath of God, everything at the cross collides. And God, by pouring His wrath out on His sinless Son, shows you He loves you and wants you to pledge your allegiance by that very event. That it took the Son of God just to buy you back. What more do we need to follow Him? Go to verse number 26. Read with me. Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged, say that word, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. What scourging is, this goes into the details of the cross even more, is they'd have a long leather strap, and I've told you this before, and you have to let this break your heart. And there was sheep bone on each end. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And the sheep bone was sharpened. And it was designed in such a way that it wouldn't just hit Jesus and cut him or stab him. It would attach to Jesus' flesh, and then when they pulled back, it would rip off long ribbons of his flesh. If you've heard, "By his stripes we are healed," it's because his back was in stripes by the time they were done. They beat him within an inch of his life. Why? Why so abusive? Why so painful? Why so graphic? Why so gruesome? Why so bloody? Why did they treat him as if he's not a person? Because that's God's view of sin. That someone had to pay. And remember, God could have chose not to do that. But the one thing that kept the process going throughout was this, that He loves you and wants you. That what drove the car of all of Jesus' life, and Jesus crying out to God, "Please don't send me to the cross," and them choosing Jesus, the whole crowd saying, "Crucify Jesus, crucify Jesus," and Jesus having to be heartbroken over that, and then them taking Jesus away and beating him and whipping him within an inch of his life, and his back being in ribbons of flesh. What's driving all of it is the love of God for you and me. What more do we need? Keep reading. Verse 27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters. And they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. And they put a reed in his right hand. I want you to notice something. They stripped him of his clothes, publicly humiliated him, and then they did this. They put a scarlet robe on him because that was a kingly color. Jesus was called King of the Jews, and so what they were doing, and remember, don't forget this stuff actually happened. This is our Lord and Savior this is happening to. The one who God sent. The one who was the chosen one, the Messiah. He walked on the water, healed the sick, made the blind to see and the deaf to hear. The Son of God Himself is being treated as if He's an animal. Why? For you and me. The scarlet robe was a kingly color. They called Jesus King of the Jews, and in a way to humiliate Him even farther, they put this kingly robe on Him, and they twisted together a crown, because every king needs his crown. They twisted together a crown of thorns. They stabbed it onto his head, and they would take the reed that they put in his right hand and hit the crown of thorns on his head so that it would stab through his flesh and blood would trickle down his face. So he has his crown and his kingly robe, and the reed that they used to hit him on the head, they put in his right hand because now he has his staff. And kneeling before him, look at verse 29. And kneeling before him, they knelt before Jesus to worship? No. To mock him, to absolutely humiliate him. They kneeled on the ground. Look what they said. Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit on him. And took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him. They humiliated and mocked him in every way possible. That's our Savior. They didn't kneel to worship. They didn't kneel to pray. They knelt to mock and humiliate him and make him feel as if he's worthless so that you could feel like you have worth, so that you could be valued. He did that so that you could be loved and accepted and forgiven. He did that. It's all. Listen, every bit of it, every last bit of it, every drop of blood, every bit of agony, every bit of suffering, all of it for you and me. It's all of it for you and me. We have to remember this and live this and want this and crave this and live our life for God because this is His love, and there's never a love in my life or any of your lives that you're going to experience that will reign so deep as this. His love will change your life. Go to verse 38. Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And I want you to see this. There's 2 crucified people, one on the right, one on the left, both of them convicted criminals, both of them who deserved the cross, deserved the execution, who were being crucified. And then in the middle, displayed for the whole world to see, displayed as a weak criminal, displayed in a disrespectful display, is none other than Jesus, the Son of God. People are watching him, laughing, spitting, mocking. And we'll read some of that, keep on going in verse 39. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he did say, 'I am the Son of God.'" And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. You see, it's not just that he was crucified and all these terrible things, but he's surrounded by people who absolutely despise him. He's surrounded by people who mock and humiliate and hate him. And they tempt him. Literally, they tempt him. If you're the Son of God, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross. Prove it. Little did they know that by dying on the cross, he was proving it. Go to verse 45. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I'm going to reread that. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" I've told you this before. In this moment was the exclamation point on the cross. Like, all of it was brutal. All of it was horrific. All of it was a tragedy. All of it was painful and terrible. But the cherry on top, like the exclamation point of the cross of Christ, is when he cries out to God, "Where did you go? I'm alone. Like, you have to understand, he was physically exhausted and weak. Many crucified victims, they nail it right here. They drive the stake right here so that your bone will rest on the nail. But what they do is they try to lift themselves up to get oxygen, because if they fall too far, they can't breathe anymore and they asphyxiate, which means they suffocate to death. So you have a man who's fighting for breath, and he feels something in him, or the presence of God leave him, and the feeling was such a strong feeling that he cried out to God, "Where did you go? Like, I'm alone." You see, it's not just that he was crucified. It's not just that he was beaten. It's not that he just faced emotional agony. It's that all of it in its entirety was God pouring his wrath out on sin. And the final moment was when God separated himself from Jesus. And here's what happened. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, "For our sake he made him sin, he made him sin who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf." I'm going to read that the correct way so you get that. I think I messed it up. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says this. You got to get this verse. This is everything. Here it is. "For our sake he made him," being Jesus, "to be sin." So listen, look at me. Look at me right now. Every sin you committed, God, for you and me, for your sake, made him, Jesus, to be sin. So on the cross, Jesus Christ is actually the sinless Son of God. Innocent, blameless, non-deserving of that cross. But it says this, "For our sake, he being God made Jesus sin." So that in this moment, the reason Jesus says, "Where did you go, God?" is because God separated himself from the presence of Jesus and saw him as every sin of every person who would ever come to faith in Jesus. So he saw Jesus as if he had committed every single sin of every single person who would ever come to faith in Jesus, though in fact he committed no sin. He saw Jesus as your sin and my sin. He saw Jesus as our sin so that his wrath could be poured out on his Son. And why? For our sake. For our sake. So that in its entirety, the cross is God crying out to you, "I love you and I want you." Like, I want you so bad. The cross cries out to you, "Please give me a chance. Please give your life to me." And so when you ask the question, why would Jesus say, "You cannot be my disciple lest you bear my cross"? Because this is no insignificant decision. Because this is no insignificant choice. Because this is no insignificant life. This is a decision that demands a daily bearing of the cross. You have to choose. You must choose. The question is not, are you a Christian and do you do these other things of the world? No. The question is, who do you serve? If you're in with the world, you're not in with Jesus. You have to choose a side. You must choose a side. And I am telling all of this to tell you, there are some of you in here right now, and you don't know Jesus. And if you were to die tonight, and you would stand before God and be sent to hell, and it wouldn't be God's fault. He gave you every chance to come to him in faith. He sent his Son to die on the cross for you. He sent his Son to be sin in your place because of your sin. And do you expect God to just give you a pass? I mean, he did all this to Jesus. He poured the Garden of Gethsemane, he's begging out to God, "Don't send me to the cross." God lets him go. They whip him and beat him and mock him and spit on him and laugh at him. And then they crucify him. All that went into it was so that sin would be forgiven. Don't think that you can just play it cool, then God is so loving and accepting that when you die, he'll let you into heaven. You're wrong. And that's why Jesus says, there's no one above me, lest you hate your father and mother. It's not that you hate your father and mother, it's this, that you love everything, everyone, and anything less than me. That what you serve most is me. What you come to most is me. That you decide based off the fact I'm a follower of Christ. That you decide based off the fact that I serve Him. That you decide based off the fact that you love Jesus and you're bearing His cross. That no matter what the world says, the world can hate Jesus. The world can say that we're too exclusive. The world can go against God all they want. We're going to bear the cross of Christ and we're not going to shut up about the gospel. That is discipleship. That is devotion. Again, remember the rich young ruler. He had the desire to get heaven. He, however, did not have the desire to follow the one that would take him there. You must follow Him. And the question is this. I can stand here and say it. For me, you can have the money, you can have the fame, you can have all the world's, you can have materialistic possessions, you can have all that junk, you can have your popularity, you can have the culture, you can have all that, you can take the world. I'm following Jesus. Because for me, this God pulled me out of depression. For me, this God forgave my sin. For me, this God pulled me out of every situation of life. For me, this God is so glorious, so real, and so immeasurably loving that I am going to commit my life to preach His Word. Do you know why I'm here? I could have taken you to Super Summer and dropped you off and saved myself months of work. Do you know why we're here? Because I believe with everything in me that what I'm saying is true and can change your life. That I deeply, desperately want you to know God. I don't want a single one of you to go through life without knowing Him, because if you do, upon death, you're going to hell. Life doesn't have to be awful. Life doesn't have to be terrible. Remember what Aaron said earlier. It is better to suffer with Jesus than to thrive without. Wow, what a point. It's better to bear that cross than to join the world in their God-forsaken pleasures. You see, it's not just a small choice, an insignificant choice. It is an eternally altering choice. So I say this entire message to say, who will you follow? Some of you don't know Him. I want everybody to bow their head and close their eyes. Some of you are in here and you know that you don't know Jesus. Some of you are in here and you know that if you died tonight, you would stand before a holy God. And as Hebrews says, it is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Like, God is graceful and merciful, and that is powerful because He sees past your sin. He sees the sacrifice of Christ. The cross is sufficient, but make no mistake about it. Just as powerful as God's grace and mercy is His wrath. And the reality is, if you don't make this choice, if you don't take a stand and say, I'm following Jesus, then when you stand before Him, you will face His wrath for eternity. So every head is bowed, every eye is closed. If you're here tonight and you say, I want to follow Jesus for the first time tonight. Like, I'm deciding now. I want to follow Jesus. If that's you, raise your hand. Don't be ashamed. Raise your hand high. Don't be embarrassed. Anybody else? Okay? Anybody else? There's a lot of people raising their hands. Don't miss this moment. Don't be ashamed. He is worthy. He is worthy. If you are here and this is your decision, here's what I want you to do.